Hello and welcome to another edition of Hypermode Live. My name is Will from Hypermode, and today our special guest is Michael Hunger from Neo4j. Hello, Michael.
Yeah, hello. Hello, I'm Michael from Neo4j, and Will and I, we worked together for a long time, and we both love graphs a lot, and also what's possible, and we still are very much developers in our heart, so we love to build things as well. And today I think we want to show you some stuff that we've built and show you what's possible to do with these kinds of technologies, and even in the GenAI space. And so really excited to join you, Will.
Nice.
Hope you're doing well.
I am, yeah. So Michael and I are, I think, both just back from vacation. So
Yeah,
we're well rested and sharp and chipper as ever, right?
totally. Yeah, I think we both went camping and hiking and doing outdoor activities, right? So that was really good. I
Yeah,
went to
exactly.
visit some friends, and we went camping. Whole barrage of nerds, gaggle of nerds, how they say, right? So
Nice.
really good.
Nice. Good
And
stuff.
even my daughter is coming along now. So she started computer science despite all the AI happening. But we have had some good family discussions about her future job opportunities. But she's one of the first, like, in between, right? So AI native. So she has Chatty at her command and still gets taught all the basic computer science processors and assembler and operating system stuff like we did 30 years ago. So it will be interesting for her to see like both worlds as such, right? So interesting times.
So I know in school there's like a lot of controversy on how students use AI tools like ChatGPT and stuff, and it seems like this weird spectrum of like some schools just kind of like outright ban it, and they're like, no, you still have to like memorize things and write your own papers, and then other schools are like, oh yeah, well these are like tools that everyone is going to use, like you're going to use this in your job and your life going forward, so we need to like figure out how to incorporate this into your education, and it's like a super powerful tutor as well, right? Like
Exactly.
what end of that spectrum is your daughter's school on?
So she's actually smart about it, right? So while some of her, fellow students just let ChatGPT do the homework, she actually lets it explain stuff to her. And so if she doesn't understand something, or if she needs to find a bug in something that she wrote, or doesn't, fully grasp some, proof or something like that. So she uses it for explaining things, but also especially for studying for exams. She actually uses it for generating test exams for her as well. So basically uploading all the, slide PDFs and paper stuff and like test exams that they got from the school. And then she has it basically generate either multiple choice or like programming tasks for her. And so she can basically practice herself. And it's actually pretty smart. Happy to be able to say that.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about like the role of AI in education going forward. I think it's really gonna like enable and sort of like democratize like the spread of these like education and tutor tools that like what you were just talking about. Kind of like if you remember when MOOCs, like the online courses were like first kind of a thing, and it was like, oh wow, like anyone in the world can have access to like these Stanford classes and these sorts of things. It's kind of like that, but on steroids, right?
Exactly. And that's also where Andrew Ng came from, right? So he was Coursera co-founder, right? And I'm also really excited what Andrej Karpathy is coming up with like his AI-powered education platform that he's working on. And because I think the biggest challenge is how to ensure that the generated content is actually accurate and correct, right? So that will be an interesting one, where it's probably similar to like RAG architectures, where the content is actually coming from humans, and then the AI is used to personalize this content to the students, skills, capabilities, and so on. So it's basically a mix of the truthful content is coming from a teacher or from a curriculum, and then the AI is more like the adaptation or contextualization of content, and perhaps validation verification, especially if it has tools available for generating code, running code, testing things, validating things, and so on. So that would be an interesting one.
Maybe we can get Andrew and Andre as our next guests on Hypermode
Yeah,
Live.
that sounds exciting. I love it. Let's do it.
If you guys are listening, love to have you.
Exactly. We can ping you on social. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Cool. Well, for those who don't know Michael, I think this is maybe your second time coming on Hypermode Live. I think
I think so. We had one in
Graph.
January or so. Was it in January or earlier last year?
Yeah, I think so. We were kicking off like a joint Hypermode Neo4j hackathon focused on knowledge graphs.
Oh yeah, right. That was over the winter month, right? So December, January, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But for folks who missed that one, or maybe folks who don't know you, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit about what you focus on, and maybe just a little bit about Neo4j?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michael. I've been with Neo4j, the open source graph database, for 15 years this year. So one of the 10 first people hanging around in a small Swedish incubator back then, which we just visited a few weeks ago, and our sticker is still on the door, which is kind of fun to see that. And doing many roles at Neo4j in the early times, of course, everything from coding in the kernel and in the query language all the way to customers and support and everything else. But then building out the developer relations function at Neo4j with one of the co-founders. And that's where Will and I worked together in DevRel, which was a lot of fun. And we built Neo4j Labs, building a lot of integrations with graph databases and things like GraphQL, Spark, Kafka, and lots of other things, which was really good, graph algorithms and so on. And for the last 2 years, I've moved to product management. So I'm now part of the product management team at Neo4j, and focusing there on product innovation, which means, of course, these days, mostly AI-related topics. That means integration with all the cloud providers and the open source ecosystem libraries like LangChain, Llama Index, Crow AI, LangChain4j, Spring AI, and so on. And also building out things like MCP servers, working with our field and customers to see what is needed, would be helpful for people, and exploring the space in the realms of possibilities as such. And it's a lot of fun these days. Of course, 60-hour work weeks are not enough to follow everything. So that's I think the biggest challenge in the AI space is basically to stay on top of stuff. I don't know how you feel about this, Will, from your perspective.
Yeah, there's always like lots to learn and lots of super interesting things to keep up with. I think Neo4j was super early on sort of focusing on this idea of knowledge graphs for AI, and specifically knowledge graphs as providing context. A lot of like the work around GraphRAG, and Neo4j did a lot around that, which was really cool to see. I dug out my...
It was actually like a perfect storm almost, right? So like the contextuality of graphs and the power of graphs to represent real world complex information, and then providing it at the right time to the LLM was really perfect from that perspective, right? So because it had much richer relevance and context for RAG than if you just do pure vector text-based approaches as such.
Totally. Super cool. And that's a lot what we're going to talk about today. I dug out my my Neo4j Ninja shirt. I was looking for my GraphRAG one, but I couldn't find it. So Yolande gave me this one for the Neo4j Ninja program. Is like a program to support Neo4j community folks for being a part of the community. So hosting the live stream today, I've earned my my shirt. So thanks for that.
Yep, totally.
Cool. Well, let's jump into it. I see a few folks in the chat. Thanks for joining today. Let us know in the chat like where you're joining from. Partially that helps me just make sure I see the chat and make sure everything's working there. But it's also really cool to see folks joining from all over. So that's great to see, and love to keep this as like interactive as possible. So feel free to ask questions. I'm monitoring the chat here, so as folks have questions and comments, we'll definitely bring those up. But yeah, let's get into it.
Awesome. So let's get started. So I'll kick it off, and then we'll have some content around MCP, why and how of MCP, and then go into demos. So Will and me, we are running the session today, and we want to talk about first about whys and hows of MCP, demonstrate how you can basically store knowledge, conversational knowledge and memory in a graph database using MCP. We'll demo Hypermode Agents using MCP servers with Neo4j, and then we look a little bit at additional resources and can do a little bit of Q&A at the end. So let's go. So if you think about AI architectures. Actually, let me go to the next slide. That's probably a little bit better. So we started originally out with, you send a question to an LLM, to large language model, and you get an answer back, right? So which might be more or less accurate and correct. It might be hallucinated. You never know, really, because if your question is not in the pre-training data, then you might be out of luck. And because LLMs have been basically trained on helpfulness instead of factuality, they rather be helpful than correct and truthful, right? So, and then we started to put in data and multi-execution and other things into this. So where retrieval augmented generation came into play, where we augment the question with data from a trusted data source before we send it to the LLM, and then we get basically the answer back from either of the LLMs. You can also do routing between different LLMs for different use cases and so on. But these days, we mostly talk about agentic architectures, where we have this agentic loop that we also have on this slide here, where if you pass in a task, which can even be a complex task, it's not basically just sent to a database to answer with some data from a query, but actually the LLM takes the task, splits it up, perhaps rewrites it a little bit, splits it up into subtasks, determines for each of the subtasks what do I have to do to kind of answer or perform the subtask, execute the subtask either in parallel or one after the other, using tools. So it basically has a number of tools available to either retrieve data or take action. And then with the responses from the tools, it observes what came back from the tool calls, looks at did I already basically get all the information to perform this task or the subtask, and if not, then it takes another loop, does some more tool calls, until at the end, basically in the observation phase, it determines that it's done with getting all the information or doing everything to achieve this task, and then basically goes ahead and gives the final response such, right? So, and this part of reasoning and observation is kind of the new part on the decision making layer, and the tools that are available to the agent are more on the tool layer. So if you look at this from an architecture perspective, we have our end user who asks the question, gets the response, and they interact with an agent runtime, which basically has here the AI model, the orchestration, which is basically things like agent memory and things like guardrails and rules and things like that. And here's also where the reasoning and planning is happening. And then we have these tools available, and these tools are basically things like API calls, database calls. It can access files, operatings, in some cases even operating system aspects. It can access UI functions and other things as well, and also talk to other agents as part of this interaction, right? And so which is really cool, because then we can start integrating lots of different, systems and data sources with our agents and give it much more power as such, right? And one thing that's actually quite interesting here is basically with this tool use, the federation between using different tools will happen no longer on the server side, but can actually be moved to the client side. So that's an interesting thing that we will also see in the future. So this is kind of the little red arrow is where we want to look at, because it's not just great, but it also had some challenges, right? So because there was no agreed upon standard and architecture, we had to implement basically, for instance, for Neo4j, in integration with each of the agent frameworks one by one. And each of the agent frameworks also had to implement basically, oh, this is kind of a graph database, or this is a relation database, or this is an HTTP API integration, or this is an Zendesk or Salesforce integration, or Google or GitHub integration. So each of those had to do their own one-to-one implementation. And so you had basically similar to in GraphQL, we had n+1 selects basically, or in SQL, we had to do many implementations because there was no standard interface here, and that's why tools were not reusable across frameworks, and that was a little bit challenging. But the third point is kind of that's why the tool quality was not so great. I think that's probably still the case because more and more tools are vibe coded these days. So the tool quality, I would probably look at using tools from trusted authors and vendors if you want to do this, because otherwise you can still end up with low quality tools as such. And the solution for this issue was something that Anthropic brought out last year, the Model Context Protocol, where model stands for the LLM. And it's a protocol that provides context to this LLM model, right? So it's basically, they also call it sometimes like an USB-C port for agentic applications, because it standardizes how tools plug into agentic systems as such, right? So, and that's actually quite useful. If you dive in a little bit deeper, what we have in the MCP protocol is an MCP server, which offers the capabilities, for instance, wrapping APIs or databases, or providing actions like booking a flight, or searching the web, or accessing your business data ERP system, or things like that, or your files on your computer. And so MCP servers offer a number of capabilities. Most MCP servers offer something called tools, which you can imagine like an RPC, and remote function call, or remote procedure call, which has basically a description, a name, a number of parameters, which again have description names, and then results as well, which have descriptions too. Resources are something more akin to web pages, where you have like static resources. Imagine something like documentation or files or database schemas also that are less frequently changing. So these can be exposed as resources. And prompts are actually instructions for the LLM on how to use the server, and they can even be chained so that they're almost like textual wizards in a way where you can guide the user through a multi-step interaction with the server. And then on the client side, the MCP client is something that's launched inside of an MCP host application. So MCP host applications are things like Claude Desktop, or Gemini, or OpenAI, or agent frameworks, or Hypermode agents, for instance, as well. So and those basically start an MCP client for each MCP server, which then maintain a connection. And these connections can run with local servers. That means the MCP client actually starts a process for the server. And then the server does the network communication, or it can be remote servers where the server is actually running on a remote server machine, and then you connect to it via HTTP, either streaming HTTP or SSE in earlier implementations. And that's basically it. So you can, if you squint a little bit, it's a little bit like Open API spec, but of course much more narrow and much more focused on the agentic use cases as such. So the idea behind this MCP approach is that the capabilities of a server are made available in a way to the agent, in a way that it's easy for the LLM to pick and choose tools that are relevant for executing the tasks, and then gets the responses back from these tools to then either reason and act on them, or return them to the users as a generated response. And there's one other thing that's possible is the MCP server can also reversely use something called sampling to also access the LLM of the client application. So it's not on this picture. I should probably add this as well, which is basically an ability for the MCP server to use the LLM language capabilities as well. Okay, and for MCP, as I mentioned, there's lots of different ways of how to how to use it, what kind of APIs you want to wrap. So the most obvious one are data services, where you integrate web APIs, search APIs, databases, and things like that. So that's something that we will look at today as well. Another one is infrastructure APIs. So for instance, if you want to create a new issue in GitHub, or if you want to spin up a Cloudflare work, or if you want to create a Neo4j database, or scale up and scale down Neo4j or a database, or something like that, then these would be more infrastructure APIs, which you then can use from your favorite MCP enabled IDE. So you can basically use VS Code, IntelliJ, Cursor, Windsurf, whatever you want to use. And each of them basically has the ability via MCP servers to also use these infrastructure APIs. So during your development process, you can also spin up and create the necessary resources that you need for deployment, for instance, as well. And then the last one is basically agent SDKs, where you basically then can integrate these MCP servers not just into client tools like Cloud Desktop or so, but into full-blown agents that you build yourself that then can talk again to other agents as well. And that's also possible. And today we want to look at two of them. One is regarding basically conversational memory stored in a knowledge graph, and the other one is interacting with a database as such. We will not cover the infrastructure APIs today. So for the memory, conversational memory, something that's actually interesting with these conversations is basically each interaction with an LLM is stateless, right? So you send a request to the LLM, and unless you provide all the information that happened before to the LLM doesn't know about anything like that, right? So you always have to basically provide prior information to the LLM. But even so, if you have like, let's say 2 chat sessions, and your first chat session passed, and then you start a new one, it has no recollection of the previous chat, right? So because it doesn't have persistent memory. But you can use MCP actually to provide this persistent memory. And in the original MCP server collection, Anthropic had an implementation of a knowledge graph MCP server to store memories, and we took this server and extended it to actually persist this knowledge graph, not just in a flat file on disk, but in a real graph database. And that's what this memory server is about. So what can you do with this kind of memory, right? So first of all, of course, you can capture learnings from your interactions with the agent or with the chatbot. You can retain the knowledge across multiple conversations, which is really important to build up kind of this personal knowledge store. If you had used something like Obsidian or Logseq or Roam before, that's kind of like a PKM that's automatically being added to and kept up to date. You can then look at this information as a graph. So many of the PKM tools also have graph visualization, so you can actually see how do the different facts and information connect to each other, what kind of clusters of topics do they form, what kind of probably unknown relationships are there between entities over multiple hops. And then the other thing is something that we also want to show today is that these memories can also be shared across, for instance, a project, a team, a family, and so on. So for instance, if you work together on a certain topic, then you can basically pick a shared knowledge representation where everyone of the team can basically access this shared knowledge base that's available, and also add new entities and information to that knowledge as well. Right. And from an architecture perspective, it looks like this. You have the MCP host, which can be everything from an IDE to Cloud Desktop, Amazon Q, Copilot, or whatever else you want to use as the MCP host. And it would use the Neo4j memory MCP server here that it starts a client for, and then it uses the MCP server to basically tell it, create these entities, create these relationships as memories, and which are then stored in Neo4j database. So today we use the Neo4j Aura database, but you can host your database wherever you want to host. And the LLM basically takes care of extracting information from the conversation or from information, and extracts the facts, and then basically calls the MCP server with the right parameters to create the entities, relationships, and observations, or update them as such. Right. Cool. And so our Neo4j MCP memory server, you can find it here on GitHub. It's an open source project like all of the other MCP servers as well. And it basically has concepts of a memory and a relationship. And then it has tools like reading the graph, searching for nodes, creating entities, updating entities, and so on. Cool. And it's actually pretty straightforward to configure. It's also in the repository. You can go to your Cloud config and then basically add your Neo4j memory server to your Cloud config. It's a Python library, so you can start it with UVX or pip, and then you provide the Neo4j connection information to it as environment variables. Okay, so if we go switch over to my Claude instance, we can actually see how this is configured here. Actually, I can also show you, let's see, in developer settings, we can see here the config as I just showed you, which is available here as such. Right, so and I never know how to close this settings pane. So for some reason, go away.
I think it's its own window, isn't it? Or no,
Yeah,
it's not.
no, it's I don't think it's an overlay or something like that. Anyway, so here we have our chat and we have our configured memory server. So you see, I have a lot of MCP servers configured in my Cloud desktop from data modeling to Aura integration to several Cypher ones. But the memory server has here the tools that I showed you, right? And now we can actually start interacting with it. So we can, for instance, ask it what kinds of memories do we have stored in our database? So, and then it basically goes ahead, calls the MCP tool. Let's see, it does the read graph tool call, and it says basically it's currently empty. There's no information. So now we can store some memory. And I thought perhaps we want to just store something about today's live stream, right? So we have this Luma page here that we can use for Claude to extract information, and then we can fetch and store this. Fetch the information from this live stream announcement and store it in the memory. Michael and I'm here with Will from Hypermode. So, and then I just pass in the head and fetches the data from the web page. It can see the information, and then it starts to create the entities and the relationships using the memory tools as such. So let's see. So it basically, this is kind of the payload that it sent into the create entities call, and you see here Michael with some observations, Will with some observations, the live stream with some observations, including the event URL, the companies, and then we have also relationships on top of that. So and now it created the information here, and we can also see this in our graph. So here I have my Neo4j database, and it created basically, let me just change this here quickly, and graph between the event, us as the two co-hosts, Hypermode and Neo4j as the companies, and that we also feature each of these technologies as well. And because we said we want to do this as a shared interaction, perhaps Will, you want to look at your Claude as well, if you can see our memories that we shared in a graph.
For sure, yeah. Let's see. So here's my Claude. So I think Michael shared me the credentials for this database earlier. So if I set it up correctly, here's my Neo4j memory tools in Claude here. So I should be able to say something like, what memories do you have? What's interesting to me too about Claude is that you don't need to update the system prompt for it to be able to use the memories. But if you do, you can give it instruction like I think Claude calls it like projects or something, and you can say like as you find new memories, save them, and so you can have this kind of running in the background to update. You don't have to explicitly say like cool. Update my database, which is neat. Cool. So so I said what memories are stored, and it came back with here's the graph. We've got Michael from Neo4j hosting this live stream, Will at Hypermode, companies in these events. Cool. So now I should be able to update this too. So let's say update my memory to I'd say include more information about Will. He was just on vacation and traveled to Glacier Park. He works on developer experience at Hypermode. And so now what should happen is that the memory server is going to recognize like, hey, writing some more information about like this Will person node that we have in the graph already. So Michael, if you want to check in the graph, like did we
Yeah,
correctly
let me do
add that
this.
information in the graph?
Yeah, let me also add something as well. So we see basically incremental additions as well. So we should, if I refresh this query here, now we should see, let's see. So there's more information about Will, I think, available here. And also about my camping and then I'm traveling and where I'm living as well. So I think we see like all the updates coming into the graph as such, right?
Awesome.
So
Super
here,
cool.
for instance, it also adds more information. So it's actually an interesting question, right? So because it has a graph, it could actually turn some of these observations into nodes, but it decided to add them as observations to the Will node as well. So I wonder what happens, Will, if you tell it to instead of adding them as observations, it should add them as nodes as well. Should we try that, or should we move on to the next? Because you have a lot of stuff to cover. Perhaps it's better to
I can try it
move
real
on.
quick.
Okay, cool.
Let me just say, please add these as nodes instead of observations. And it's thinking.
While it's thinking, perhaps you can answer a question from Amal on YouTube. So Amal asked, how is access managed? So you have two options with MCP. So one is you provide connection information like API tokens or connection credentials as environment variables to your MCP server. But there's also the option for remotely hosted MCP servers to give you an auth flow. So if you're using them from a browser or as a remote connection, then you can have also an auth flow, and then basically the permissions that your user account or your project has on the API that the MCP server wraps would be used for the access control there, right? And then the other thing is also something I showed here in Claude as well is when you have your MCP servers, you can also choose, for instance, to disable the tools that can like delete entities or delete observations, right? So you can also choose basically to only allow non-destructive tools as well, right? So that's also an option that you can apply as well. So let's see, we'll edit these as nodes now. Let's see what happened. And now we should have more information here about Will, about his vacation in Glacier Park and about his position as developer relations at Hypermode as well.
Nice, cool.
Right.
So I like that idea that this knowledge graph can be shared like across an organization, like through an enterprise. It's not just specific to like a single user, right? Which is pretty neat.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah. Well, let's take a look.
Will.
Absolutely. If I can work the screen share here, there we go. So maybe I'll go through these slides kind of quick, and then I want to jump back in the demo. So what Michael showed was basically this knowledge memory server specifically, right? That is taking like plain text, and there are tools specifically for adding memories, searching the graph for memories. But there are also other ways that we might want to interact with the graph. Earlier, Michael mentioned this like Neo4j Cipher MCP server that enables us to work more directly with the database, right? So if we have a model that can generate Cipher queries, if you're not familiar, Cipher is the query language that Neo4j uses, kind of like SQL, but for graphs. If our model is capable of generating cipher, we can do sort of like a text to cipher, and our agent is able to query the database directly. And this fits in well with Hypermode Agents, which is all about building domain specific agents with natural language. And so if we look at the architecture for this, it's pretty similar to what Michael showed earlier, except the MCP host application is the Hypermode Agents sort of hosted agent experience. This is what it looks like. There's a connection guide on how to add Neo4j as a connection in Hypermode Agents. I'm going to go through this in a second, but basically the idea is we can sort of chat with our graph and use other connections to add data to the graph as well. And one of the things that at Hypermode with Hypermode Agents that we focus on is, like I said earlier, all about natural language. So we think you shouldn't need to be an AI engineer to get started building AI agents. You should be able to describe the type of agent you want to create. And then you also don't need to be an expert like prompt engineer. Agents are driven by natural language prompts that have a well-known structure for best practices. And so we've put a lot of effort into being able to go from describe the type of agent you want to create to then generating a user prompt for an agent that follows best practices and can actually allow us to use these tools and connections exposed by MCP. So I'm going to jump over to Hypermode, and if you want to follow along, certainly can. I'll drop a link to this in the chat. So I'm just going to go to hypermode.com, click login, and we're going to work with our agents tooling today. There's also the console app, which we use for hosting graphs, apps, model router, things like that. But I'm going to sign into our Hypermode Agents experience here. And initially, you'll see just the Tom Anderson agent. Let me zoom in a little bit. Who's your personal assistant. I was playing around last night with an Excalidraw agent, which actually works quite well. I don't know if folks use Excalidraw for creating diagrams, but I wanted to sort of have a chat with your Excalidraw diagram, which I was kind of surprised that feature wasn't. Yeah, and it worked quite well. I was really surprised that feature isn't in Excalidraw, so now it makes me want to play around with this a bit more. But anyway, that's the only agent I have right now. So what I want to do, though, is I want to create a new agent that's going to use the Neo4j connection in Hypermode Agents to query that knowledge graph that Michael and I were just using the memory server to work with. So let's say create an agent that is a knowledge graph and Neo4j expert who knows cipher and can query graphs in Neo4j. So that's roughly what I want to do here. And we can see that Hypermode Agents created this well-structured system prompt that is going to define sort of how the agent behaves, the context it has, and we can edit this as we sort of interact with our agent. I think it's really an iterative experience as you learn kind of what to add to the prompt. But I think the initial one is a good getting started space where I just kind of want to briefly describe here's what I want my agent to do, and let's get going. So I'm going to jump over to connections. So these connections, these are all MCP servers that expose tools to our agent. The only one I've added so far is GitHub, but let's add Neo4j. And I'm going to connect to that Neo4j instance that Michael and I were both using earlier. I think I have the credentials over here somewhere. Username is Neo4j, and here's the password. Apologies, Michael. I'm about to paste your password on screen. Most of it was cut off.
All good. We're going to destroy the database afterwards anyway, so no problem.
Cool. So now I'm connected to Neo4j. I can go into threads, which is where I have all the conversations with all my agents. I'll say create new thread with my Neo4j Nexus agent. And the first thing we can say is something like, what data is in my Neo4j database. And so now the agent is going to use the Neo4j tools that are exposed to it, which one is one exposed to the schema. We'll take a look at the specific tools in a minute, but first it took a look at the schema and said, oh, okay, well, I have nodes with these labels and these relationship types. So this is the graph that we created, Michael and I, just now in Claude with that memory chat.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, what do you know about Will? And this just came from the schema, right? So the tool that it called was like the get schema tool. So it didn't actually query any of the data. It just looked at like, what is the data model of the graph? But now we're going to actually execute a query. And there's two tools, right? There's like a read cipher tool and a write cipher tool. So we saw it called like the read only tool. And it says, yep, here's some information about Will. Let's say, what information do you know about any events that Will is co-hosting?
And a good question here is actually, does it need to do another tool call, or can it actually use the conversational history to answer this question as well, right? So,
yeah, and I think in this one, we should look at the queries that it generates, but it looks like it didn't. It just fetched Will, and I mean, I guess it does have the live stream, so it should have that information. But here,
yeah, it's probably in the observations, right? Yeah,
right.
It's probably in the observations. Right? So what's interesting here is kind of that's kind of the power of MCP as well. Is kind of this, you can integrate it in lots of different tools and connect to the same data source and basically use it from lots of different places, right? So that's kind of one of these benefits of having a standard protocol, because then it doesn't matter where you integrate it from and how, right? So then that's kind of addresses this many-to-many need of building integrations as such as well, right? So that's actually really nice to see.
Totally. And now I can use this information in Hypermode Agents, which is really good, I think, for automating like workflows for things like content generation for marketing is something that we see kind of a lot of folks using, where they want to integrate different like tools in their marketing stack. So I could say something like write a LinkedIn post, maybe advertising
with a lot of emojis.
That's right. Emojis are very important. Advertising this event to encourage folks to sign up. Be sure to use lots of emojis. And so what's nice that I found in this sort of like helping you write social media posts is it follows best practices. It knows like how long they're supposed to be. I think these things on LinkedIn where you have kind of like emojis wrapping kind of the headline. And then if you like click below the fold, you've got kind of like the emoji bulleted list of that sort of thing. And then of course, you don't even have to say it. You need lots of hashtags for any social media post.
Yeah, really nice.
But that's pretty good.
And this is kind of a collaborative thing, right? So for instance, imagine we are a team that work on something, and then it's a larger project, and all this information is stored in a joint knowledge graph as well. And so that's really nice as such.
Totally. Let's take a look at like the tools that are exposed by that MCP server. So I I created a Neo4j sandbox instance earlier. I'll drop the link to Sandbox in here too if folks want to give that a try and follow along. Sandbox is really cool. It allows you to like spin up Neo4j instances with either populated data sets or empty data sets. So there's one with like a subset of the Yelp data set and one with movie recommendations that I spun up. And here I'm going to start the Neo4j Cypher MCP server. And if you saw, I just had like the credentials here passed in flags. You can find these in the Sandbox UI. This, I think, is the Yelp one. So I can find the connection details here. And I'll drop a link to the docs too to see how to do that. So now I've started the MCP server, and this is exposed over HTTP, which is cool. So you have the option of exposing these as streamable HTTP or standard IO to run locally as well.
Yep.
And the next thing I want to show is how I can use the MCP inspector tool. So this is really good for debugging or just kind of testing MCP servers. So I just ran this mpx command, which I'll put this in the chat too. This is useful. I use this all the time.
Yeah, me too. So it's super useful. It's maintained by Anthropic as well. So like all the protocol changes and spec changes are also reflected in the inspector tool. So it can basically show you everything from, tools to resources to prompts to sampling and lots of other stuff, routes and so on. So it's really, really nice.
Exactly. So I connected to the local MCP server. I can go into prompts, go into tools, list tools, and there's 3 tools here, right? There's the Neo4j get schema tool, which we saw being used earlier in our Hypermode agent. And let me just take that off the screen. There we go. So this is a different data set. This is users, businesses, reviews. This comes from Yelp data, and then I can run a Cypher query. And this I think really highlights that it's the model that is generating the query, right? Like the MCP server takes Cypher, and so your sort of MCP host application model is the one responsible for generating the query. So here's sort of all the Cypher I can remember how to write, which gives me a count. We have just over 1 million nodes in the database.
Yeah, exactly. So and actually it's quite interesting, right? So because the schema tool returns the schema, which gives the LLM enough information about the graph schema, which entities are there, which entity types, which attributes do they have, what relationships do they have between each other. And that's enough for the LLM to generate correct Cypher based on the user question that comes in, or even do multiple statements as well in an agent call to basically iteratively retrieve data as well, which is actually pretty nice. And all of the frontier models are actually pretty good at this these days.
That's one thing that's really surprised me is for database queries, especially, and like schema-aware database queries, like it's actually getting quite good at generating those, which is cool to see. We can also create data here. So there's a write Neo4j Cypher tool. So one thing I want to show is how we can, in Hypermode agents, like combine the connections that we have to fetch data from a like authenticated service through tools exposed. In this case, we're going to use GitHub. So I'm going to create a new Neo4j sandbox. This is going to be a blank database instance. And here's my connection details. So I'm going to go back to my Hypermode agent here. And in connections, I'm going to go to my Neo4j connection, and I'm going to reconnect this one with new database credentials. Username is going to be Neo4j. My database URI is going to be in my sandbox instance. It's here, this bolt URL. And I need my password, which is right here. Cool. So now we're connected to that Neo4j sandbox instance. We'll go
which is empty right now, right? So there's no data in there right now.
Yeah, and let's verify that. So let's create a new thread, and we'll say what data is in my Neo4j database. And so before, when we were connected to like that shared memory knowledge graph, we saw the data that was created there. Now we're calling the database schema tool. Yep, it's empty. That's cool. Now in my connections, you can see I've already added GitHub. So I've authenticated GitHub on my behalf. So I want my thread, this one. And so how about, let's ask it some information about my GitHub just to make sure. How about show me a list of my, 10 most popular GitHub repositories. And so now this is going to use the GitHub tools that I've given Hypermode Agents access to fetch repositories on my behalf. So it knows because I've authenticated, this is in the context of my GitHub user to fetch those. And what I want to do now is like fetch this information about my repositories and then create that as a graph in Neo4j. And I realized that because I'm authenticated, some of these are private repos, which is fun, but that's okay.
But they're still popular, or are they?
That's a good question. I think it's maybe measuring like number of commits as popular rather than stars. So this one, so I forked the MCP Neo4j repo earlier today to make a docs change. So that's why that one's there. This is one a private project I haven't announced yet. That is a fun MCP server for agent memory. That uses graph algorithms and some other interesting things.
Nice.
So little preview on what's coming there. And then some other. Most of these are projects I've forked, interestingly, which is why they're perhaps so popular. But anyway, let's say I want to create a knowledge graph in Neo4j of these.
Should you first discuss a useful schema, or do you want to give it like an vibe it and let's see what happens?
Yeah, let's say how about include the language and I don't know, there's like keywords or tags or something for each repo. How about I'll say like show me the Cypher queries and data model you would use to create this graph. And this is something I think that goes to the point of our agent prompt earlier. Like we could say like always ask before updating a query, or like always show the query first before running it, and these sorts of things. Because I don't know, sometimes you don't want a lot of back and forth. Sometimes you just want it to go do something for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you can check before. But then the other thing that you can also do, you can have an interactive discussion on evolving a model as well, right? So you can basically first have a discussion. If you have a more complex use case, for instance, what's a typical model for use case ABC? And then you can say, but in my case, I need to have this or that difference or so. And then you can work on the model, and then you can use the IG queries to materialize the model with the data in the database as well. Yeah. And what this also shows really nicely is that you can federate on the client side. So we'll just pull the data from GitHub, but then writes it to Neo4j. And the same way you can combine any which systems, right? So basically any 2 systems or 3 systems, they pull data from one system and then send it to 1 or 2 more systems to enrich it or get more information, but this is all happening on the client side. So the systems themselves don't have to be prepared to be federated in some way, right? So that's all happening in the client and is under your control as well, which is actually really, really cool.
Totally.
Powerful.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of back and forth there, just to confirm, like, yes, I actually do, and I do want you to create this graph, and kind of like, you know, which properties do you want to focus on, and I will just let the model figure it out. But we can see now we're executing the write cipher query tool to update and load some of this data into our Neo4j instance. And we can go back to Sandbox and open up Neo4j browser to see this data being created in Neo4j. So Neo4j browser is like a query workbench for Neo4j. Michael showed kind of the next iteration of it in Aura, which is what, called query. Is that the distinction?
Yep, exactly. That's a rewrite of browser with the latest design system and other things as well.
Nice. My nodes haven't made it there yet. Let's see what they're still running.
Still executing.
Well, this is running because we're running out of time here. Let's take any questions. I saw one from Global Adventures that I thought was really interesting here that I want to touch on. So they're asking, what are blockers? What blockers to MCP being used in a global federated way for data discovery? Are they primarily technical, governance related, or economic? Do you see Neo4j and Hypermode agents overcoming them? I'll take maybe just have like the first thing that comes to mind, and then Michael, I'll turn it over to you. I think right now, like some of the blockers, and Michael touched on this earlier, one is just like the quality of MCP servers and MCP tools that are out there. Like it was really easy to like generate essentially MCP servers wrapping existing APIs. And so some of these API servers are out there that expose like hundreds of tools that are designed for API consumers, and not the way that like an agent expects to use tools. So for example, there are some like chat services that expect like the ID for a channel to post a message, not the name of the channel. And the agent can't figure out, how do I fetch the ID to post it to this channel? Like those sorts of things. So from like a practical sense, I think one is making sure that the like MCP servers and tools that are exposed for agents are like really high quality and are designed specifically for agent use is kind of a blocker. And this is something we're focusing on now at Hypermode with Hypermode Agents, is making sure that the tools that we expose to agents are like well crafted. We're building some MCP servers on our own where needed, but also making sure like to work with the community to choose the correct ones. But anyway, that's kind of my initial thought. Michael, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So we also have a slide on that we might not be getting to later. So one other topic is kind of also trust and security, right? So because there was also the question about like access control and so on. So you want to be able to have a trusted MCP server that comes either from a vendor or that you basically have the source code for and that you can verify and validate for what it's doing. And then the other thing that might be a blocker is ways of how you can use MCP servers and tricking the model into exploitation. So you can basically, one MCP server can exfiltrate data that you actually didn't want to be exfiltrated. So that comes back to kind of what servers do you enable, what servers do you add, and make sure that you have only trusted ones available as such. And also make sure that the data that you process is also coming from a trusted source, not an untrusted source, because otherwise you have to challenge that someone can inject some instructions into an untrusted data source, and then these instructions will be used and executed by the LLM, which then can lead to data exfiltration. So there's still a number of things that need to be addressed from the MCP community. So security is one, discovery, package management is another one, which goes into registries and how do I deploy and run servers. That's why we will move more and more towards hosted servers that have a proper auth flow as well. And then also the level of support in clients, right? I mentioned that some clients have really good support. So of course, MCP Inspector has really good support, but also VS Code, for instance, has first-class support of MCP servers. And in most of the other tools, it's varying as well, right? So that's another thing that could be a blocker. And one of my personal pet peeves is kind of the statefulness. So the Anthropic people said we want to have stateful connections for MCP servers, where every user has basically a stateful endpoint on the other side, which is useful for some aspects. For instance, if you imagine you build up, like in the conversation, a more complex, let's say, a data model, and you don't want to send the model back and forth on every conversation. But of course, stateful servers don't scale as well, right? So, and then you have to basically do sticky sessions and not all of the other things. And if you think about hundreds of thousands or millions of users for your hosted MCP server, then statefulness is probably not what you want as well. So there's a number of things, but what's actually really good these days that most of the large companies have actually joined the MCP community and the working group and steering committee. So Google, Microsoft, AWS, OpenAI, and others. And they, of course, are pushing for a lot of these more, enterprise-grade security, safety, deployment, discovery, and other questions. So we see a rapid evolution there in the MCP protocol as well to address many of these issues and questions. And until then, I would, as I said before, use trusted servers. I mean, if you play around with stuff, then it's okay. And if you don't have access to critical data, but as soon as you want to use them in more critical context, then use only trusted servers from trusted vendors, and make sure that you also work only on trusted data as well, so that no one else can inject something into your data stream that can be used as instructions as well.
Cool. That was that was a great question, and I think very appropriate. As kind of the ecosystem evolves here, for sure.
Exactly.
Cool.
There was another question on visualization. Will, if you can switch on my screen, can show how to visualize something like this. So for instance, in my case, I basically just told Claude to read the data from the graph and then generate an artifact that has it's basically D3, I think. D3 graph, and it basically takes the data that it read and turns it into an visualization, and then you have basically a graph visualization here as such. So these LLM tools, as Will also mentioned before, like with Excalibur, actually pretty good at generating code, and they can, for instance, also do things like charts, tables, markdown, simple UIs as well. And so if you want to have some quick and dirty visualization of something, they can usually do this quite nicely as such as well.
Awesome.
Do you want to look at some of the other questions? Or, I mean, we're a little bit over time, but happy to stay for 5 more minutes to answer some questions, or we can go over resources as well.
Yeah, maybe let me just go over some resources for folks, and then we can take maybe a couple questions to see how we're doing on time. Michael, do you want to talk about this one?
Yep. So we have a number of resources on how to get started with MCP and Neo4j. So we have a number of blog posts. We have a developer page for MCP. So the two servers that we talked about today, the Cypher server and the memory servers, are just 2 out of 6 that we have. There's also other ones for graph algorithms, data model generation, and other things as well. And we have even a number of Graph Academy courses. So these are free open courses on using and building MCP servers that you can use with databases and in other ways as well. So feel free to check any of these out. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to the Neo4j community or open issues on the GitHub repositories as well.
And I think this repo here is where the code for the MCP servers and the docs that we were looking at today live, right? The
Exactly.
knowledge graph MCP server and the Cypher MCP server, what we looked at today. But I
Exactly.
think that there are a couple others there too, right? There's like a data modeling one, and you talked briefly about like the Aura console MCP
Exactly.
server.
Yeah, exactly. And these are all residing there as well.
Cool. On the Hypermode side, there is a tutorial on creating a knowledge graph agent using Neo4j and Hypermode Agents that looks at fetching data from Product Hunt and then enriching the graph with data from LinkedIn, so you can understand like who is behind some of the most more successful products on Product Hunt. What are some of the common themes around there? Kind of interesting to think about like investments and like what's going on in the AI
Really
ecosystem.
cool use case.
Totally, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
the a lot of the products on there now are AI focused, so it's a really good way. To your point earlier of like how do you keep up with like all of the interesting things going on in the AI space? Well, build yourself a knowledge graph of it.
Yeah, sounds a good use of two good tools to get access to the information. And I mean, graphs are really good at connecting these dots as well, right? So that's kind of one of the qualities that you get from that.
Totally. So today we're on the Hypermode live stream. You may be watching the recording. If you're not joining live, we have several other events coming up. Here's just kind of the next week or so. This comes from our Luma calendar. You can get these at hype.foo/events. Next week, we have Amy from the Graph Geeks community who's going to give a talk about agentic GraphRAG. So definitely check that out. And then the following week, we're doing an in-person workshop in Seattle at Microsoft Reactor in Seattle with Jason from Neo4j and our friends at MotherDuck. And we're each going to do like a tutorial that kind of builds on like intro to MotherDuck, intro to Neo4j. And then we're going to see how to use these two tools together in Hypermode Agents to build kind of a data pipeline of exporting like analytical data from MotherDuck and load that into Neo4j, kind of how you can build a graph from analytical data in MotherDuck. So if you're in Seattle, check that out. That should be interesting. And then we have Adam, also from Neo4j, joining to talk about some of the cool things that he's done with building the MCP agent tools for Graph Academy and what that looks like. So lots of interesting graph agent things coming up in the next month or so. So be sure to check those out.
Really cool.
It's a little early for nodes, but I want to talk about nodes because I know the save the date is out there. The conference isn't in. This is Neo4j's developer conference. It's not until November, but there are a series of workshops leading up throughout. I think like October and maybe
September,
starting
October.
in September. Yeah. I'm doing one of these kind of a deeper dive into some of the things we talked about today, like MCP with Neo4j and building agents. So look for that. I don't think the registration for that is announced yet.
No, it's
but
coming out later this week. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. But if you sign up on the save the date on the nodes page, I'm sure you'll get reminders for all of that good stuff. Cool. Well, we're a bit over time, so maybe we should drop it there. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you, Michael, for sharing, sharing your expertise and wisdom. This was super fun.
Yep, totally.
Cool. Any parting words of wisdom or anywhere you want to point folks to get in touch with us, Michael?
I mean, as I said, look at the resources and try it out for yourself. Pick one of the MCP tools. You can use even VS Code. You don't need to get like Claude subscription or something like that. Pick VS Code, try it out in agent mode. You have to switch to agent mode in VS Code to make use of MCP agents. But then try it out and see how it works and get some first-hand experience using that. And share what you've built and how you use them. There's actually one really cool use case for connecting to databases with MCP is actually when you write or generate code for a database, you can use the MCP server to validate all the queries that are in your code to actually that they're valid and returning correct data. And you can even use it for generating, unit and integration tests as well, because it has access to a live database inside of the IDE, which is super, super valuable as well.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Cool. Well, we'll leave it there.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone for joining today, and we will
Thank
see you
you
next
all.
time. Cheers.